Hello everyone, and welcome back to Hakuoki. This is the last part of Chapter 8 before we go on to the final Chapter 9. If you need to refresh your memory, please use the playlist to find the other videos. But I already knew the answer. If he let Hakuoki go, the first thing he would do would be to tell Hijikata everything, and then the jig would be up. I doubt he survived, said Kodo. After all, I did bring quite a few of them. Hakuoki was an excellent swordsman and a Fury, but the Furies my father had brought didn't seem to have any trouble in sunlight. Hakuoki, on the other hand, had looked pale and weakened. I felt my heart clench with worry. Then suddenly, "Really? Come on, why you gotta just assume I'm dead? Hurts my feelings." "Hakuoki?" And behind him, "Chizuru, you all right?" said Hijikata. He spared me a quick, concerned glance, then his eyes flicked back to Sanan and Kodo. "I'm fine," I nodded vigorously, and Hijikata let out a short snort of laughter. "What?" said Kodo. "But my Furies are better. How could you have destroyed them all?" Hijikata gave him a wry smile. "Better, if you say so, old man, but if you want to take out the Shinsengumi, you'll need about 10 times what you sent." My father seemed at a loss for words. I figured you'd show up here soon," said Sanan. Sanan, however, didn't seem surprised in the least. "You didn't bring any of the men, though. Well, I suspected you wouldn't." "Still," said Sanan, "it doesn't seem rather reckless for the two of you to just charge headlong into unknown enemy territory?" Hijikata levelled his cold, piercing glare at Sanan, and when he spoke his voice was as frigid as frozen steel. "Explain. Why didn't you contact us?" Sanan's face fell just a little bit. "There's nothing for you in Sendai," he said. "The Northern Alliance plans to leave the war." "What?" The Sendai domain, the leader of the Alliance, was trying to avoid the war. It hit almost like a physical blow. "They heard about all the losses in Aizu," said Sanan. "Perhaps they got scared." At that point, my father seemed to decide that there was little point to keeping anything more hidden. "I was given orders by the Imperial Army to come to Sendai. They told me to take the castle with my Furies and completely annihilate the Northern Alliance. But that's not what I wanted to do," said Kodo. "I can't agree with their ideology or politics, and at any rate, the Sendai were already preparing to flee. A little pressure and I was able to keep them from doing anything." "We found common ground in our distaste for the Imperial Army," said Sanan, "and decided to seize the Sendai ourselves. In return for not attacking the castle directly, Kodo was given tacit consent to remain by the domain. That allowed us to increase our Furies in number." "Father, does this mean you're on the side of the former shogunate's army?" He gave me a warm smile. "I'm on your side, Chizuru. I have no intention of taking part in mankind's disputes. Let us bring retribution to the humans who destroyed our clan. We will forge a new kingdom with our own hands." "Father, so he meant to declare war against all of mankind, then? No, not even for my father would I do such a thing." But before I could answer, a whole crowd of men poured into the room. They seem to have noticed the intruders," said Sanan. There was still a smile playing about Sanan's face. Not only does this castle hold the Furies of the Imperial Army, but also the Shinsengumi's Fury Corps. Then we would have to contend not only with our own Furies, but also with my father's much more dangerous improved ones. All of the Furies that exist in this country are gathered in this castle, said Sanan. They are a force powerful enough to overcome even the newest Western firearms of the Imperial Army. That they were powerful, I had no doubt. But in their eyes I saw only madness, the mindless hunger and lust for blood of an animal starved too long. There was no humanity there. "Please give us your help, Chizuru," said Kodo. "We need you to lead us. You must command these Furies and restore your demon clan." "Father, I didn't care about restoring the Yukimura clan. I didn't want to create more Furies so that blood could drive them mad. I didn't want to see any more people suffer. Father, you're wrong." His eyes went wide. "Building a kingdom on the corpses of others isn't right. Human or demon, every life is precious." His mouth gaped in shock. Sanan turned to Hijikata. "I believe Kodo was saying that he'd be willing to assist the Shinsengumi. So what do you think, Hijikata? Would you like to lead this army of Furies against the Imperial Army?" Hijikata's reply was immediate and certain. "You know the answer." Hijikata had been opposed to the Furies from the beginning and had never approved of Sanan's research into them after my father's disappearance. I doubted he changed his mind about them. Sanan sighed. "Very well." He drew his sword slowly from his scabbard. Sanan? Did he mean to attack his own friend? I stiffened, but Hijikata didn't move toward his own blade. He remained still, coolly contemplating Sanan. Almost as if someone had dumped paint on it, Sanan's hair slowly changed to white. He raised his sword. A single cut and the Fury was dead. "All a Fury exists for is battle," said Sanan, "and now we've taken that away from them." Sanan's mouth twisted into a sad smile as he looked down at the man he'd just killed. "The least I can do for them is let them die here in battle," said Sanan. The room fell silent. Then it exploded in noise, the enraged battle cries of the Furies, the click and rattle of swords being drawn. "Heisuke?" said Hijikata. "I know," said Heisuke. Heisuke dropped into a fighting stance and slipped his hand around the hilt of his sword. His hair turned white. "Sanan, this is way too badass for an old guy like you. Why didn't you tell us?" "Well, as they say," said Sanan, "to fool your enemies, you must first fool your friends." Their faces split into grins as their swords whistled and sparked, Fury after Fury falling before them. "Besides," said Sanan, "doesn't the hero's right-hand man make the best villain?" Hijikata responded with a bark of wry laughter and drew his own sword in a flash of silver light as his hair turned white as well. "Still means the hero gets stuck cleaning up the damn mess." As their three swords spun and hissed through the air, blood gushed and splattered, painting the walls of Sendai Castle a deep red. They looked like three gods of death, drowning their foes in a sea of blood. I noticed that my mouth had gone dry and my hands had begun to shake. "Then Everything you told me was a lie, said Cordo. He seemed deflated. You said you wanted to do more research on the Furies and the Kingdom of Demons. Why, Sanan? Sanan looked over at him, sword in hand, spattered with blood. I saw the end, he said. He gave a sad chuckle. I was trying to discover a way for Furies to live past their limits. Learning how short our lifespan was made me impatient. If I wanted to continue my research, then I would have to dirty my hands. Sanan frowned, disappointed in himself. Every suspicious thing he had done had been in service of a single goal, saving his fellow Furies. The Furies have no future, said Sanan. You know that as well as I do, Cordo. It was the truth, but it hit like a physical blow. No matter how resistant you make them to sunlight, they will push themselves too hard, and their lifespans will shrink, and the bloodlust will drive them mad. My father simply stood there, dumbstruck. Sanan had confirmed the truth we'd all suspected. There was no way to save the Furies. We are a mistake, a failed experiment, said Sanan. Furies are not something that should exist on this earth. Let's end this. Sanan's true intentions had left me surprised and shocked, as had his admission that the Furies were a failure. Was he right? Could they never be saved? Had all hope been lost? I let my mind drift for just a moment, and then saw a shadow move out of the corner of my eye. Ah! Suddenly there was a Fury only feet from me, his eyes red and mad with bloodlust. I reached for my sword. I was a little too late. Before my hand had even touched the hilt of my sword, I saw the Fury's blade sweeping down toward me. Huh? There was blood, but it wasn't mine. No cuts on my body. Someone had protected me. Father? I reached for him as he fell. The Fury pulled back for another swing, one that would likely be the end of both of us. Then it froze, gurgled oddly, and slid neatly in half, a blade glistening in the centre. The owner of that blade, his face twisted by an emotion I couldn't place, snarled at the corpse as it fell. Turn your back on us in a fight, will you? Idiot, said Hijikata. He shifted his eyes up to my father's wound, and I saw his face twitch. Immediately he moved closer and turned his back to us, sword held at the ready. Chizuru, are you all right? Asked Cordo. It was an effort for him to speak. The wound he'd taken was undoubtedly a fatal one. I wanted to scream, but I tried to force a smile to my face. Yes, I'm fine. I'm not hurt at all. Despite my best efforts, my voice shook and cracked. He looked so peaceful. Our research was a failure. I knew there was no future for the Furies. Father, but I couldn't give it up. I wanted to bring back your clan, your family. Ever since I'd been young, my father had always tried to do what was best for me. Even now, in his own way, he was still trying. It seems my fate is to die with the Furies. I have done something terrible. His voice was getting weaker. This is for the best. Please, Chizuru, don't cry. I said nothing. I only nodded. Were I to open my mouth and speak, then the tears would never stop. He gave me one last smile, sighed, and was gone. After what seemed like an eternity, I looked up. The battle was over. Except for Heisuke, Sanan, and Hijikata, not a single Fury was left alive. "Kind of a waste, isn't it?" said Sanan. "That many Furies could have been awfully useful." I blinked. Had he just made a joke? "The Shinsengumi's lost a lot of its fighting strength. Do you think we can win the next battle?" asked Sanan. Sanan's mouth tightened in concern, but Hijikata replied with a smile. "You don't win battles by thinking you'll lose them." "Well, you don't win just by thinking you'll win either," said Heisuke. Heisuke snorted with laughter, then coughed to cover it up. It was true, the Shinsengumi had lost a lot of Furies, but their unity had grown stronger. That was something at least, or so I wanted to think. A sudden burst of pain wiped the grin from Heisuke's face. Sanan, too, had doubled over in agony. Was it the bloodlust? "Looks like we've reached our limit," said Sanan. His voice was oddly calm, almost distant. A limit? Had they used up the last of their life? Heisuke saw my eyes go wide and gave me an awkward sort of laugh. "Well, we were some of the first Furies," he said. He was right. They'd been in more battles as Furies than anyone else, and all of the strength and healing they'd enjoyed had eaten away at their futures until there was nothing left. "Did you know?" said Hijikata. Sanan smiled. "What warrior doesn't know his own body?" His legs suddenly shook violently and he crumpled to the floor. Hijikata dropped to his knees and took both of their hands in his own. "I know we have not always seen eye to eye," said Sanan, "but I have always been proud to be a member of the Shinsengumi." Sanan's voice was growing quiet. "You think I didn't figure that out?" said Hijikata. "Any idiot could see you'd do anything for the Shinsengumi." Hijikata was doing his best to act tough so that Heisuke and Sanan wouldn't worry, but it wasn't easy for him. "Looks like we're taking the lead this time," said Heisuke. "Don't be in too much of a hurry to catch up, though. All right?" Heisuke grinned and tried to keep his tone light, although his voice was starting to fade too. Hijikata gave him a short nod. "I'm having a hard time buying that, yes," said Heisuke. "You're a little too short-tempered to keep a promise like that." "Shut it, you little brat," said Hijikata. "You really think I'm going to take that kind of crap from you?" Heisuke's face relaxed as Hijikata snarled back at him. He'd done that on purpose. "You must go north," said Sanan. Sanan could barely speak now. Kodo said that he used water from the northeast when he was refining the water of life. Then perhaps there was still hope. Perhaps something from the north could repair the damage done to the bodies of Furies. "Hijikata, don't lose sight of what's important, all right?" said Heisuke. "Being reckless doesn't work out so well." His voice had grown rough and raspy. I saw Hijikata's knuckles whiten as he tightened his grip. But with a sound like sand pouring over a stone, their hands crumbled into ash, and in moments they were no more. "Hijikata." He didn't answer. He only stared, silent, at the twin piles of ash that sat where his friends had been only moments before. I felt somehow that he was crying. There were no tears in his eyes, of course, but even so, somehow he was crying. I didn't know how long we sat there before he stood up. "Let's go." "Okay." His voice was curt and clipped, but when he turned to look at me, his eyes went suddenly wide, and he turned away, uncomfortable. "Hey, no crying." I nodded and tried to stop, but it was no good. No matter how much I wiped at them, the tears wouldn't stop. In one day, in 1 hour, I'd been forced to say goodbye to Heisuke, Sanan, and the father I hadn't seen for more than a year. The following day, Hijikata and Enomoto visited Sendai Castle once again. Their intent was to discern the leanings of the Northern Alliance, specifically in regard to fighting the Imperial Army. But it was just as Sanan had said. News of the losses in Aizu had paralyzed the Sendai leadership with fear, and they were scrambling to make some sort of deal with the Imperial Army. Enomoto argued that they should give up on the Sendai and move further north. We also learned that Yoshinobu had already made a deal with the new government and was currently under house arrest. That wasn't enough for the new government, however. Satsuma, Choshu and their allies were still working to take everything that belonged to the shogun. Enomoto had made it quite clear that he didn't care for how they were doing things. He argued for founding a new country for those who were being oppressed by the Imperial Army. That was a decision that would have to be postponed, however, at least until the end of the battle at Bonari Pass. Once that was finished, Otori's men would arrive in Sendai. After the army was whole again, they'd make their decision. I heard talk that we might leave the mainland to regroup elsewhere and asked Hijikata about it. "Are you going to go to Izu?" Izu was a large island north of Sendai, at least a day's boat ride across the sea. "Maybe." He shrugged. The Shinsengumi works for the shogun and the shogunate. That hasn't changed." "The Shinsengumi shows others the way, right?" I nodded. Hijikata smiled. "If the Shinsengumi is something fighting men can believe in, then I'm sure Kondo's happy." The ideals that Kondo and Hijikata had fought so hard for had been taken to heart by many soldiers and samurai. Had Kondo still been alive, I had no doubt he would have been pleased. Well, that's one more reason not to die, then. It was a burden on him, undoubtedly, but Hijikata had seen many of his friends lay down their lives for the Shinsengumi and what it represented. Knowing what it had meant to them, he couldn't allow himself to die. As long as men believe in what we stand for, I can't let the Shinsengumi die. That's right. The doubt that I'd seen in him weeks before was gone. He had accepted his place at the head of the Shinsengumi. Seeing him so at peace made me feel the same. Hijikata smiled. "I have to protect the Shinsengumi." "Yes, you do." He looked over at me, his gaze warm. I felt good. Just being next to him was enough to make me feel like everything was right with the world. A few days later, the men we'd left in Aizu finally reached Sendai. Unfortunately, bad news came with them. "Saito has fallen in battle," said Shimada. His last words were, "Leave the rest to Hijikata." Shimada's jaw was tight with emotion as he spoke. Hijikata had left him in Aizu to watch over Saito. He probably felt especially responsible for the other man's death. I bit my lip until it almost bled, trying desperately to keep the tears from my eyes. It didn't seem fair to cry in front of him. "Sorry I put you through that, Shimada. I'm just glad you made it back alive." He clapped the other man gently on the shoulder, but it was his words that made Shimada's eyes go wide. "Thank you, sir." Heisuke and Sanan had died in Sendai, and now Saito had died in Aizu. Hijikata was the only Fury left among the Shinsengumi. "It's been hard already, but I'm pretty sure things are gonna get worse," said Hijikata. He looked down for a moment as he spoke. "You've all fought enough." Shimada set his jaw and looked back at Hijikata. "I've already given my life to the Shinsengumi," said Shimada. "It just hasn't taken it yet. We'll follow you to the end of the world, sir." The rest of the men nodded and mumbled in agreement. "We want to fight as the Shinsengumi. We want to fight for the justice we believe in." Shimada's words brought to mind what Saito had said to me the last time I'd seen him. The Shinsengumi was united in body and mind. I felt a great happiness welling up in me, and suddenly I couldn't hold it in any longer. Tears spilled forth. "Idiots," said Hijikata. He twisted his face into a sneer, but there was no hiding the warmth in his eyes as he looked out over the men. Every one of them respected him. They knew the coming battle would not be an easy one, but there was no doubt in their minds. Their place was with Hijikata and the Shinsengumi. October came. The Sendai domain was moving closer and closer to submitting to the Imperial Army, and it was getting more and more dangerous for us to stay. Even Otori agreed that we should leave. Ultimately, it was decided that the Shinsengumi would head to Ezo with Inomoto's fleet. We left Sendai and headed into the forest. We'd almost arrived at the rendezvous when Hijikata suddenly stopped and turned to me. "Chizuru, I want you to stay here." "What?" His words stopped me in my tracks. "There's gonna be a lot of fighting. You should get away from that. There's no reason for you to stick with us anymore, right?" "No, there is." It came out somewhat louder than I'd intended. There was no legitimate reason for me to accompany Hijikata and the Shinsengumi, true, but I wanted to stay by his side. "Kazama'll probably be coming after me soon, but I can take him. You don't need to worry about that." "No, that's not it." Once again I found myself nearly yelling. "I don't want to stay just because I think I need you to protect me from Kazama." Hijikata sighed and looked away for a moment. When his eyes came back to me, they were cold and quiet, almost sad. "I can't make you happy." "What?" My eyes went wide. When I spoke, my voice shook. And here comes a very tricky and important decision. I don't need to be happy. All I want to do is to fight alongside the Shinsengumi. I want to follow the same path you do. I didn't care what my position might be, so long as I could stay at Hijikata's side. "Please, I'll do whatever you tell me to." He gave me a twisted half-smile and crossed his arms. Finally he sighed and shrugged, defeated. "Well, I'm touched you feel that way, but I want you to be happy." This is, of course, precisely the outcome we wanted. I hope you can see now why I chose that dialogue option, even though it looked counterintuitive at the moment. "Hijikata!" He wasn't just saying that to make me feel better. I could feel the sincerity behind his words. I was happy to know he cared, but... "Here are your orders from the chief of the Shinsengumi." He looked me in the eye, his voice flat and cold. "You would impede the function of the Shinsengumi and will therefore not accompany us to Ezo. You're a woman and you deserve to have your own life. I can't let us tie you down any more." It wasn't a shove, it was barely a gentle tap, but I felt as if I'd been punched. "No, this isn't what I want." I cried out to him, my voice shaking, but his back was to me and he showed no sign that he heard. "Hijikata!" He walked away from me and didn't stop. He didn't even turn to look back at me. "Hijikata!" I stood there stunned. It felt as if the very ground I stood on had begun to crumble beneath me. Despair filled my heart until I thought it would shatter, and tears began to pour from my eyes. Yukimura?" I heard a quiet voice behind me and turned to see who it was. "Otori!" I heard everything. Otori and his men were marching with us to meet Inomoto's fleet. I'd heard that he'd been in some of the fiercest battles in Aizu, and they'd changed him. He seemed stronger now, like a samurai. "I apologize for eavesdropping, but there didn't seem to be a good moment for me to admit I was here." He coughed awkwardly, then handed me a small white piece of cloth. "What's this?" "It's called a handkerchief. They use them in the West. I thought you could use it to dry your tears." I hesitated for a moment, but it was embarrassing to stand in front of him covered in tears, so I took it. He waited until I had calmed down some before he began to speak again. You want to stay with Hijikata, I take it?" I nodded. "Then will you wait for us until we've settled down in Ezo?" "What?" Once we're settled in, I can send for you. I mean, I can hardly leave a crying girl here alone." He smiled. "Otori." "Oh, you needn't thank me." He dismissed my protest with a good-natured wave of his hand. "Once you get to Ezo, I'll assign you to Hijikata. It won't be easy work, but at least you'll be with him."